Hello students, welcome back to the biology class. So in the last class we continued the 13th chapter, that is the organisms and population, and we discussed the topic of life history variations. We learned in the last class that population tried to evolve in such a manner that there would be maximum reproduction possible, and that is called as the reproductive fitness of the population. It is also called as the Darwinian fitness, and that stands for the higher R value. R stands for the birth rate minus the death rate. We also learned that this happens in a population in a particular habitat. So according to the habitat, populations of various species have evolved various adaptations to increase their R value, to increase their reproductive fitness or the Darwinian fitness. We learned that this all has happened under the set of particular type of selection pressures. The organisms developed because the type of evolution pattern they were facing. That means what? That we learned in the last class that the organisms evolve, and during evolution various types of environmental constraints are there, pressures are there, which include both the biotic as well as the abiotic factor. So according to the type of factors they were facing or the challenges they were facing, various populations and various species have evolved different strategies for reproduction so that they can easily evolve such adaptations which increase their R value. We learned in the last class that this all depends upon the biotic abiotic components which the organism faced during evolution, and accordingly whether the lifespan of the organism is short or long, whether they breed once or many times, or whether they give rise to large number of small sized offsprings or small number of large sized offsprings. This all depended upon the type of life history variation they had. We learned the example of bamboo. We learned the example of Pacific salmon fish, and they breed only once in their lifespan, but then there are organisms in which they reproduce so many times in their lifespan, example birds and mammals. We also compared the large size, small number offsprings of oyster and pelagic fishes with the birds and mammals, where the number of offsprings produced are less but their sizes are bigger. So which one is the best one for the maximum fitness? We learned in the last class that the ecologists have suggested that the life history traits of organisms have evolved in relation to the constraints imposed by the biotic and abiotic components of the habitat in which the organisms live. And evolution of the life history trait in different species is an important topic for which even still research is undergoing. After this, we learned the concept of R selection and K selection. We learned that there are two types of growth model in the previous classes. One give rise to the J-shaped growth curve, and the other give rise to the S-shape or sigmoid growth curve. We learned in the classes that when the resources are unlimited, then generally the growth pattern is J-shape, and this is more common among small organisms like bacteria, insects, weeds and rodents. And in the case of the large size organisms, the K selection is the main selection in which the shape of the growth curve will be S-shaped, and in such category the carrying capacity plays an important role because resources are limited here. Example, human, elephant as well as the whales. So we made a comparative study in the last class that the R selection type of lifespan organisms, they have an environment which is unpredictable. So because the environment is unpredictable, they quickly try to reproduce and they try to bring some adaptations which are of no use. But when we compare this with the K selection organisms, their environment is quite predictable and stable, and then that's why they reproduce slowly and they produce variations which are generally useful variations. We learned that the R selection organisms have a high fecundity rate, so they produce large number of offsprings. And then when we compare this with the K selection organism, they have a low fecundity, so the organisms produced or the offsprings produced by the female in their population is low. The R selection individuals, because they produce many, so their sizes are small. When we compare this with the K selection, we learned that they produce, because they produce low number of individuals or less number of individual, so their sizes of the offsprings are larger. So they produce many organisms, many offsprings, they produce few offsprings, and then their generation time, production time is also short in the case of R selection because environment is unpredictable. But in the case of K selection organisms, because the environment are predictable and stable, that's why they have a long generation time, or what we call in biology as gestation period. Then the lifespan of the R selection organisms is short. The lifespan of the K selection organisms is long, and then there is no parenthood, no parental care in the case of the R selection organism. We all know about the insects as well as the weeds, but when we talk about the K selection organism, parental care is an important aspect of the reproduction. So that's why the R selection individuals show lesser chances of survival. But when we compare them with the K selection organism, there is more chances of survival in the case of these organisms. So this is how two types of organisms are different, and this is again the concept which is linked with the growth models as well as the life history variations.